When I was a boy in London, I used to love to visit the British Museum. And in the neighborhood of the museum, there are a number of old shops, some of them I think dating from the end of the 18th century. And on the inscription over the shop window, it said that they sold philosophical instruments. And I couldn't for the life of me make out what philosophical instruments could be, because I thought philosophers were people who simply sat thinking and wouldn't have any need for any special instruments. But when I went up to these shops, I found that what they had in the window were telescopes, slide rules, chronometers, and all sorts of what we would now call scientific instruments. Because, you see, the original name for science was natural philosophy. Because a philosopher is a person who is curious about everything. He's not only curious about theoretical matters, but he's also curious about what we should now call practical matters. And I regard myself as a philosopher in exactly that sense. Because aside from being interested in changed states of consciousness, in problems of death, problems of time and space, and the practice of meditation, I'm also interested in what you would call down-to-earth things, such as food, clothing, housing, problems of ecology and population, because all this is part of natural curiosity or philosophy. Well, now today I want to begin with the subject of clothing. You see me now arrayed in what has become the standard official man's dress for the whole world. The business suit, derived from England, popularized by the Americans, adopted by the Japanese, the Indonesians, the Indians, the Persians, the Arabs. Everybody on the face of the earth is now tending to go around dressed like this, in a peculiar form of clothing which derives from military uniforms, because you will notice that it has buttons on the sleeve. Now, what do you suppose those are for? They don't fasten to anything. Originally, though, on the uniforms from which these coats are derived, there were a whole row of buttons all the way up. And they were on military uniforms or uniforms worn by servitors to prevent them from wiping their noses on their sleeves. And then it has these curious lapels. And goodness knows what purpose these serve. Sometimes people turn them up to try and protect themselves from the rain, but they're not really very effective. And then you have to wear this extraordinary shirt, which is extremely difficult to fold up if you've tried and you're not an expert laundress. And you have to strangle yourself with a necktie. Also, you have to wear pants, British trousers, which is the most devastating garment for men. Trousers are worn by Chinese women. Chinese men, in the old times, before the era of Mao Zedong, wore skirts, because trousers are a garment suitable for shapely women. They are not at all suitable for men, because they're castrative and extremely uncomfortable, especially if you want to sit on the floor. To wear a business suit and be comfortable, you invariably have to sit on a chair, because if you don't, your trousers will become baggy at the knees. And a coat, as you know, when you try to put it in a suitcase, is very difficult to fold. And the problem of a business suit coat is this, that it's made to fit the contours of the human body. It doesn't, you see, it has to be tailored so that it fits you here, and it fits you here, and it fits across your back. And all this requires a very complex process so that it will snugly fit around you like this and show up your form, which is all very well if you have a slim form and you haven't begun in later age to develop a protuberance here, as we naturally do. And then, of course, also, how about keeping these trousers suspended? I still can wear a belt, but the time is going to come when I'm going to have to wear suspenders, which is a kind of block and tackle contraption underneath here, which is another and further inconvenience. But it just does astonish me that all over the world, men are putting up with this drab, funereal uniform, looking like undertakers and ministers, when they could be much more comfortable, so that I could be just as respectable, just as proper, just as demure, and instead of this, come on like this, which is the Japanese kimono, as worn not so much in modern times as 50 years ago by all Japanese gentlemen. Now, this is one of the most extraordinary garments ever made. To begin with, it's completely comfortable. You feel absolutely relaxed underneath it. Nothing is restricting you anywhere. And it has these tremendously capacious sleeves, which are immense pockets into which you can put anything you want. I mean, you know, you can put your wallet in there, and pipe and tobacco and cigarettes and money, anything you want. And you also can put things in here. And then it's quite proper for you to carry a fan. And when the weather's too hot, you can just cool yourself off. And this outward garment here is a coat for cooler weather, or for rather proper occasions when you should be wearing it. It's called the haori. You can take the haori off and just wear what's underneath, and you see more or less the same thing as before, with the big sleeves and the enormous pockets. And I want you to notice a peculiar thing about a kimono, and we can show it from the haori, and that is that it's entirely cut from rectangular pieces of cloth. You see? The cloth has not been shaped to fit the human body. Cloth is naturally rectangular because of its being woven material with a perpendicular warp and a horizontal woof. And so cloth, of its own accord, comes out in rectangles. Now, in designing this form of clothes, we do not alter the rectangular nature of the cloth. We do not attempt to shape it in any other way so as to force it to fit the curves of the human body. But if we honor the nature of cloth in that way and respect its nature, curiously enough, it respects our nature. Because if you hang rectangular cloth upon you, it falls in folds which give you a kind of natural dignity. When you shape the cloth to you, you begin to look more and more like a monkey. But when you allow the cloth to hang upon you and follow its own nature, you look more and more like a prince. So this is the essential principle of Japanese clothing. Now, the Japanese, as I said, have been abandoning this clothing, and I asked one of them why. Well, the first thing he said is, it's impossible to run for a bus in a kimono. And that's perfectly true. You cannot run in this garment. You have to walk at a dignified pace. And I think that's very good for us. I don't think any self-respecting person should ever run for a bus. That we need, above all things, to slow down and get ourselves to amble through life instead of to rush through it. And therefore I consider that this garment, commonly worn by men, would have an enormously beneficent effect on American civilization, that we should be much more comfortable, much more at ease, much more dignified. I wear one all the time, not quite as formal as this, but I always wear a kimono around my home. When you get up in the morning and you put on your bathrobe and you feel at ease, that after a while you begin to feel guilty. Because you feel you should be, as we say, dressed and in your right mind, so that you can go out and be a person of action. You can go to the office and feel that there it is. Now, that's another thing which makes the philosopher comment in connection with clothing, is commuting. Every day in the urban areas, millions of people are absolutely wearing themselves out, tearing their nerves to distraction by going along the freeways in a car, fouling the atmosphere to do their work. And their work, you see, is completely divorced, something quite separate from their play. Now, this is one of the great insanities of our civilization. Every sensible person should get paid for playing. If you don't get paid for playing, something's wrong with you. You haven't learned the art of life. And furthermore, in most kinds of business, especially clerical forms of business, where you need an office for paperwork and so on, you don't need an office if you've got a telephone. The telephone company can show you how to do anything in the world you want to do by way of business by phone, so that you can cut down the enormous amount of time wasted in rushing around commuting. You can stay at home and do your work from there. But we have got this idea that work is one thing and play is another. Therefore we have work clothes, and the business suit is not a practical form of work clothes, and we have play clothes. And I suggest, and we will develop this in future talks, that one of the most important things is to get our heads together with our genitals together with our heads, and our work together with our play, and make our life unified and one.